If you're involved in the fiber arts community, you've probably used a pattern before or at the very least heard about them. There's a lot more that goes into developing a pattern than you think. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about pattern testing and how to become a pattern tester. Pattern testers have a really important role in making sure that a pattern makes sense to people outside of the designer, kind of scanning for errors and really just making sure that it's ready for public use. I was selected to be a pattern tester for Wavelengths Crochet, and I will be sharing some tips and tricks from just my own personal experience being a pattern tester while also testing her newest pattern, the Kennedy sweater. By the time this video comes out, the pattern will be out in February 2024, so that will be linked down below for anybody interested in trying it out. If you're new to this channel, hello, my name is Marissa, and I like to make crochet and general art content here on YouTube. So if that is something that you're interested in, make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below if you have experience being a pattern tester with your own experiences, and let's make this video a resource for our community. I decided I did want to have stripes in my sweater like the original pattern, so I came up with what felt like a million different color combinations in Adobe Illustrator until I made one that felt right. I decided to use Lion Brand's Hue and Me yarn, so I modified my colors to better match the yarn. So with that said, it was time to gather all of the yarn I was planning on using and make both my body gauge swatch and ribbing gauge swatch, which later then turned into the actual ribbing for the front panel. So I was going until like 2 a.m. last night because I was caught in my audiobook. I'm reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, well, actually listening to. I decided it was finally time to stop when my chapter ended at like 2:30 a.m. But this is where I got last night. I would say I made very, very good progress. You can get a better idea on what the mesh stitch looks like. It's a really nice texture. All of the stripes here are 2 rows each of the mesh stitch. The colors are also exactly what I was picturing, so that's a plus. Yeah, this sweater definitely works up really fast because this is a weight 5 bulky yarn, so I'm excited to bang out the rest this week. Okay, so I figured that I would sit down and kind of talk to you guys directly about pattern testing as a whole and my experience with it if any of you are trying to get into it or want to know what the process is like. Is it scary? Is it easy? How do you meet people to do it in the first place? All that jazz. I've only done it a handful of times at this point, but I did think it would be kind of helpful to hear my perspective as somebody also kind of new navigating that space, but has done it enough now where I kind of know how it works from a beginner's kind of standpoint. So I think a good place to start, and I'm going to be working on this sweater as I do this, a good place to start is how to get into it in the first place. Like, how do you become a pattern tester? The biggest thing you can do is have an Instagram account. That's kind of where a lot of it comes from, at least in my experience, where just follow a bunch of creators that you really like, pattern designers, whoever, because a lot of the times they will put out a call for pattern testers on their Instagram accounts, and you can apply to be one. Usually this is conducted via like a Google form where you just kind of list your username, like your Instagram username, how many years of crocheting or knitting or whatever fiber art you're trying to test, how many years of experience you have, if you are able to get the supplies on your own. Pattern testing, they don't give you the supplies. The only thing you're getting for free is the pattern itself. And if you are able to complete it within a certain time frame. So there is usually a deadline when it comes to pattern testing. Usually it depends on the project, like how long it is. Something like a sweater, you're given like a month or so to do it. So when you're signing up for that, it is a commitment and you have to make sure that you are able to meet that. But basically you just kind of have to keep an eye out on Instagram or whatever social media platform that your designer of choice is the most active on when they're doing like a call for testing. You will not get picked all of the time, so don't take it personally if you don't. I've been rejected before, but sometimes certain pattern designers do require you to have already made one of their patterns before. And you're probably like, well, it's kind of like the whole thing where you need X amount of years of experience to apply for a job, but how do you get the job if you don't have the experience? Sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's not. So that's kind of how you start to get into it. So if you are selected for something, the next thing that will happen is that you are usually put into a group chat with a bunch of other people that are also testing the pattern. In the case of this sweater, I am making a size large, and I think a few other people are also making a size large because I had a question last night and somebody immediately was like, oh, I was confused about that too, and they helped me out. But the group chat is really helpful for stuff like that because the pattern designer is also in there, like kind of guiding you through things if there's a question on how to do the stitch or the actual design itself, or if you spot an error. They're usually very diligent about kind of fixing it and like emailing an updated PDF version. The whole point of pattern testing is you're helping somebody smooth out any bumps that may be in their pattern, so to speak. You know, like it's fun to do it. You kind of have a duty to fulfill, you know? But once you get added into the group chat, there will usually be discussion of when the deadline is, if it wasn't already stated in whatever form or whatever calling it was for you to apply to it in the first place. And it's also really nice if you are using a yarn that is different from the one suggested to kind of talk about what meeting gauge is like, which is also a very, very, very critical part of pattern testing because I know a lot of people don't do gauge swatches. I'm not really a gauge swatch girly, even though I think everyone should because it's very helpful. For this was my gauge swatch. It was supposed to be 4 by 4 like inches, but I ran out of yarn. But I measured it and it did come to like the 4 by 4 inches. So this was 13 rows. Originally, the pattern called for an 8mm hook. I didn't previously have an 8mm hook, so I put off starting this pattern until I got one, which is kind of silly because I didn't even try to swatch it with like other hooks just to see. This was gigantic, and this was not 4 inches across, it was like 6. So I didn't meet gauge, and it's very important to test that because sure, you're making a sweater for yourself or whatever it is, but you're still kind of, you have an assignment, you know, it's like a homework assignment essentially that is like fun to do. I went down multiple sizes when I was making the gauge swatch. I'm using a 5mm hook for this, which is 3 hook sizes smaller than what was suggested. Now, granted, it's because I'm using a different yarn that was suggested in the original pattern. The yarn that was suggested was this beautiful hand-dyed yarn, like small business kind of yarn, and like we were offered like a discount and everything, but it was still kind of out of my price range at the moment. Like I just started a new job, I have other things, so I wasn't looking to break the bank on this sweater just yet. So I did go with Lion Brand Hue and Me yarn. So when you're doing pattern testing, it's important to not only kind of really know what your tension is when you're crocheting, knitting, whatever it is, but also understanding that the yarn itself that you're using in tandem with your tension has a lot to do with what your final like gauge is going to be. So definitely something to keep in mind. Another thing that's important to follow is, you know, you can't really go rogue on these kind of projects. Like you have to, if it calls for a weight 5 yarn, don't use a weight 4 or a weight 6, use a weight 5. And I know sometimes it's not always super accurate, which is why you have to test. Another part of going rogue to keep in mind is what your colors and color blocking is like. Some patterns are really flexible with, this is just the structure of the garment, do whatever you want with colors. Or maybe some will be like, actually I would prefer if you stuck within this, or don't add a stripe. So it's important to ask these questions and also see what other people in your group are doing. With this sweater, when Emily posted it on her Instagram, it did have stripes, and that's what drew me to apply to be a pattern tester. So I decided to stick with stripes. Some people didn't, they just did a solid, or they had a variegated yarn, which allowed for a nice color change, but it wasn't like intentional, you know? Well, it was intentional, but you know what I mean. Rule of thumb is that it's always better to ask questions than to just kind of assume things. It's just better to ask if you have a question surrounding little specifics like that. And that's why when it comes to picking out your yarn and colors and everything that you do the gauge swatch, because each yarn is different. I feel like sometimes when something is a weight 5 on the label, it really isn't. It may have like a halo, which is why it may be considered a weight 5, but I've had that experience with the last cardigan that I tested for What Morgan Makes. It was the Karen macchiato cakes. It says it's a weight 5, but it's absolutely a weight 4. So you just kind of have to be aware of the gauge and making sure that if you don't do gauge swatching normally, this is the time that you absolutely should. And another thing is to make sure that you have various ways to measure your work. Flat rulers are fine. One of these types of rulers also are like super helpful because it's a little bit more flexible. I use this for like measuring myself. So just kind of having these different tools is super helpful. You definitely want stitch markers. I keep mine in a Pokeball because why not? Just to see what they look like. Row counter, very, 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 very critical thing that I wish I bought sooner into me doing crochet. I think I went like a few months without one of these, and if you're new to crochet, get a row counter, please. Do yourself a favor. The last thing I would say that's like super critical if you're going to be a pattern tester, you gotta take notes. If there's an error in the pattern, or just if you go off and do a different size hook, or if you're making, I have this problem sometimes, like I'm making a size large, but I'm like a really short person, maybe I'll have to shorten the length of the sleeves, kind of just taking note like to your measurements, like, okay, this pattern called for 28 rows on the sleeve, but I have little arms, so I only did 22. Little things like that are really helpful to the pattern designer to just kind of know. Maybe they can make a note of it in the pattern where it's like, you know, play it by ear when it comes to making the length of this, or like it's easily croppable, or you can make the length of it longer, but also just so you have record for it too, where I know we all like to start projects and then stop them and come back and then you're like, what was I using? Again, with this, there is a time constraint, so you want to make sure that you're like hitting the deadline, but taking notes is very, very, very important. And when it came to coming up with what I wanted to do with this, I looked online to see what the yarn that I was kind of thinking of, like what colors were available. And a lot of the Hue and Me colors are very like, they're kind of subdued a little bit, and the colors online are a little bit inaccurate. So I would just say that when you are coming up with what you want your thing to look like, to make sure you kind of know what the yarn looks like in person before you fully commit to something, because I kind of had to modify what my design looked like initially. Like I'll show you what my original colors were in Illustrator, and then I modified it as closely as possible to what the actual yarn colors look like. Just kind of be a little bit wary when it comes to choosing colors. I've learned the hard way multiple times that it's a little scary buying online and things are usually not what they seem. But this has been a really fun process. This sweater has been working up really, really quickly, probably because it is a bulky weight yarn. So it's weight 5, like I mentioned. It's a mesh stitch, so it's just single crochet, chain 1. It's really easy to follow. I have been having a wonderful time, and like I did this in like a day and a half. So it works up fast and it's really easy. It's fun. So if you're looking to get into pattern testing, it's really not super hard to dive in, and then when you're done, you feel really proud and your work will be featured on somebody else's Instagram page. And it's also like just like how you network with other creators, if that's a space that you're looking to get into, and maybe you'll make a new friend or two. I ran out of yarn when I only have a little bit left to do in this really nice like ivory color. It's called Salt, for anyone interested. So like I mentioned before, each stripe is 2 rows each of each color, and the biggest part that I needed this white color for is done. I just need it now to finish off this row, 2 more, and then a few more on like the sleeve. So I really don't need that much left. But I ran out of yarn and I had to wait for more to come in. So I think a tip when you're pattern testing also is to make sure you maybe buy more yarn than you think you need. It is better to overestimate in general whether you're pattern testing or not, because it's kind of hard to quantify how much of each yarn you actually need. I'm not a numbers girly, so I don't know how to figure that out. So yeah, just make sure you're a little more prepared than I was, because if you run out, it's gonna push back how much time you have left to finish the project. And thankfully, Emily extended the deadline for everybody, just because a few other people were also having that problem where like the yarn was sold out or was on back order or whatever. But I finally have this, and now it's time to, I guess, go into turbo mode and finish the rest of this. But this is the back panel. And it's basically exactly the same as the front, except I'm not doing like the V-neck. It's just gonna be the red on top, all the way to the shoulders. So, time to resume. Okay, so the shoulders are now sewn together, and it's starting to take shape. This is always my favorite part of making any garment of clothing, because you kind of get to see how it's going to look on you. Obviously, I still need to close this and add the sleeves and everything. Next steps is to add the ribbing border around the V-neck, and like I just said, close this up so I could start the arms. But I just love how this looks, and it's a nice length too. I am very short. I am just 4'11", so a lot of patterns tend to be too long on me, but I just followed exactly what was in, and it definitely has more of a cropped fit, which is kind of a normal fit for me because my torso ends like right here. Yeah, so I just wanted to give a little update on this because this is the first time I've been able to actually wear it. All right, a few things to note about this. 1, it looks amazing. 2, I did have to make a few adjustments to the pattern. Kind of like what I was saying before, you kind of have to take your own measurements into account. For example, the sleeve portion originally was 50 rows, but like I said, I'm rather short, and this is actually 40 rows. So I kind of had to push things up a little bit. And I also made the cuff just a little bit shorter than what was called for, but it fits me perfectly. You are still designing something that you have to wear, so it's okay to kind of modify things in that sense. The second thing is there are too many stitches here, so I'm gonna have to frog like this whole section and kind of do like an every other ribbing situation up here, because it's like going up and out as opposed to laying flat, which is annoying, but it is all part of the process. There's frogging that usually is involved and a lot of trial and error. But in the meantime, I am going to get the other sleeve done so the majority of it is just over with, and go back to this dang ribbing. Okay, this is the sweater. Like I have mentioned, this is way too long. I kind of feel like I'm one of those Victorian people with like the ruffle collar kind of thing. The biggest problem is back here. I did too many lines of ribbing, so it's so annoying to be done with the sweater technically, because like it's done. I just need to block it. It's annoying to be done with the sweater, but like not really, because I basically have to redo this entire thing. But I think the color blocking worked exactly how I wanted to. I am curious to see what this is going to look like when I do block it, because it is very, tense isn't the right word for it, but it's kind of stiff in some parts. I really like the feel of the Hue and Me yarn though. It's mostly acrylic. I think it's like 80% acrylic and 20% wool, but it's not like scratchy. But yeah, and I also last second changed this sleeve. I originally had it so the cuff was pink, but but I realized that this pink color isn't like a large section anywhere else, and I already have the red up here, so it wouldn't make sense for this whole part to be red and this be pink. So I did change that from the design that you may have seen earlier in the video, but it is perfect otherwise. Hi, I'm down here now. Are you guys ready for this? Because this is done. I have to block it still, but it's done. Bam! Look how freaking cute this is. I no longer look like a Victorian socialite with the ruffle collar. Yeah, so last night was interesting. I redid this like up to, I think over here. And then I realized I should have just frogged the entire collar. I only did like from the back down. So I had to redo this collar 3 times. But 3rd time's the charm. It lays flat, there's no standing anywhere. It looks really, really good. And like I said, all I have to do now is block it because it is very, stiff in some parts, and I think it can fall a little bit nicer, but it's perfect length if I kind of wanted to do a little French tuck situation. All of the striping lined up exactly how it needed to. The sleeves, perfect length. This is what happens when you actually measure yourself and follow gauge. So like I mentioned earlier, make sure you make a gauge swatch. So now, last few steps. I am going to block this, rinse it, wash it, do all the fun stuff. I have my own clothing tags that I like to add to all of my crocheted garments just as a final nice little touch. And that will be the very last step that I do after this has been blocked and it's dry and it's pretty much ready to go. All right, so I have the sweater blocking behind me. Scout was very confused what was happening. I have turned on the fan because I squeezed so much water out, but it's gonna take a little bit for it to like fully dry. So hopefully that's going to help it speed up. But I am basically just going to leave this like this for the rest of the night and then put it in the second bedroom when we need to go to sleep because it's probably not gonna be dry until then. But I'm really excited to see what it's gonna look like when it's done. Okay, that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it was helpful in some way, shape, or form. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, leave a like on this video, and like I said earlier, please leave a comment with your own experiences with pattern testing. If I've missed anything, if you want to elaborate more on something, go to town in the comments. Also, don't forget to follow Wavelengths Crochet on Instagram and all of her social media. She just hit 40,000 followers, which is, I think, a testament to how great her patterns are. I think I'm going to be doing her Fiskin coat next because I just really like how her patterns are structured. So make sure you follow her. Everything will be linked down below if you would also like to try out the Kennedy sweater. This was such a fun thing to work on, and I'm so excited. It came out even better than I could have imagined. But I will see you guys next time. Bye.